The Western leopard or panther toad, Sclerophus pantherinus, is South Africa's largest and arguably most beautiful toad. It is also the most highly endangered. Affectionately known also as the snoring toad due to the male's uniquely resonant rumbling mating call, this member of the Buffonidae family is easily identified by striking dark red-brown symmetrical markings, dramatically edged in black and yellow, somewhat similar to those of a leopard, hence its name. In common with most toads, the western leopard has rough granular skin, with prominent parotid glands behind the ears through which it secretes a sticky, toxic fluid when threatened to deter predators. Female western leopard toads can reach an impressive 20 centimeters in size, while the males are slightly smaller. In the wild, their lifespan can be up to 20 years, but unfortunately attaining a ripe old age is becoming progressively less likely for these lovely indigenous amphibians. Occurring only in South Africa and endemic to the southwestern Cape, leopard toads prefer sandy coastal areas with access to permanent water and wetlands, which they use as breeding sites. Unluckily for the toads, the threatened habitat that is essential for their continuing survival is also immensely desirable for human development and is rapidly being degraded or destroyed, so numbers are in steady decline. Once widely spread along the Cape coastal lowlands, today only two distinct fragmented populations of western leopard toad remain. The larger is found in the southern Cape Peninsula, ranging from Fish Hoek to Noordhoek and Kommetjie, and incorporating the suburbs around Zandvlei and Zeekoevlei. A much smaller population exists between Stanford and Pearly Beach, along the Walker Bay coastline, separated by the high Hunklip Mountains. The red dots on the map indicate former toad populations at Betty's Bay, Kleinmond and Hermanus, which are now extinct due to uncontrolled urban sprawl.
Today, the distribution of the western leopard toad looks like it's in two distinct areas. First of all, we have the Cape Flats and parts of the Cape Peninsula, and then on the other side of False Bay. But this situation is relatively new for these animals. 20,000 years ago, at the height of the last glacial maximum, things would have been very different. There would have been a lot more low-lying areas, more than 100 kilometers to the south of where the animals are today. And in those low-lying areas, we would have had a lot of large mammals. So things like hippo would have been roaming, and all sorts of other large animals that would have been making temporary water holes all over the places. And it could be that western leopard toads use these temporary water areas in order to breed, and that there were a lot more places available for them then than there are now. So when we look at the distribution of the western leopard toad now, we've actually got to think back in time to how it would have been, and then imagine the sea slowly coming in over a period of about 9,000 years and dividing these populations either side of False Bay.
Also called the August toad, it is in early spring after the Cape rainy season that male Cape western leopards begin congregating at breeding sites to woo potential mates, and are soon joined by female toads lured by their deep, throaty, nocturnal bellows. Female toads then select suitable males and allow them to mount their backs. In this amplexus, or mating position, the female lays her eggs in the water, while the male fertilizes them. Having each laid some 20,000 eggs in long gelatinous strings, females leave the water and return to their lives in gardens, parks, and farmlands. Over the ensuing 3 weeks, the eggs develop into tadpoles, nourished by algae in the water. Their metamorphosis into toads takes about 10 weeks. Finally, between October and December, armies of tiny toadlets leave the water en masse, dispersing to find suitable foraging areas and shelter. However, only a minute percentage survive to reach adulthood. Thousands perish in the hot sun, succumb to predators, or are crushed by lawnmowers and moving vehicles.
The western leopard toad is classified by the IUCN as endangered. And there are several reasons for this. Firstly, as I've just described, the extent of the occurrence of this species is less than 4,000 kilometres squared, and that triggers one category by the IUCN. Within that entire distribution, the areas that the animal actually occupies is around 400 kilometres squared. So there's a very small area of occupancy within that. And then the populations that there are, they're not able to move between one another, partly because the population on the Cape Flats is so urbanised, animals aren't able to move between sites, but also that big disjunction across False Bay, individuals can't move there. So it's what we call severely fragmented. In addition, the impacts that we see are both from agriculture in that more rural area and the impacts from urbanisation, the increasing urbanisation in Cape Town, mean that where it does occur, the animals are still endangered.
Those fortunate toadlets that manage to survive this multitude of perils return as adults to the same breeding grounds each year to perpetuate a time-honoured life cycle. Sadly, during the mating season in particular, despite prominent warning signs, squashed or fatally mutilated leopard toads are an all too common sight on Western Cape roads. Through the efforts of concerned environmentalists, awareness of the leopard toad's plight is gradually increasing, and there are now dedicated drives to save these vulnerable creatures during their annual migration and spawning. Unfortunately, the odds still seem stacked against them. Rapidly burgeoning urbanisation is encroaching on and eroding traditional breeding areas, with highways and fences cutting off migration routes and access to foraging.
The first problem is that almost all of the places where this toad breeds are in private hands. So the owners of those, sometimes houses and gardens with ponds, sometimes farms with dams where they're breeding, have to be very careful that they manage those properties for the toads. So we can't have alien fish that are introduced that might eat the spawn or the tadpoles. And we've got to make sure that the toads continue to have access to those ponds in order to breed. And then there's something that civic society can do as well. So there are already existing volunteer organisations, and I'd encourage you all to go and take your children, introduce them to the Western Leopard Toads, because the children are going to be the future volunteers, the future custodians of this species. So go out, help move the toads off the road so that they don't get hit by cars. And then also in December, when the very small metamorphs are starting to leave those ponds, they also need some help to make sure that they're not mown down on the roads by cars. So cars are one big problem, one hazard to this species that we can really help improve the future of this species. And then I would say the second thing is that we don't have to have this species as endangered for all time to come. We can encourage it to move and expand its range, especially in the rural areas. So there's no reason why it couldn't move back into Hermanus, perhaps even as far as Betty's Bay and Pringle Bay, and to inhabit some of the areas that it did historically. And then we wouldn't have an endangered Western Leopard Toad, we'd just have a Western Leopard Toad that we'd all be happy to see all the time. So I think really it's up to us to ensure the future of the Western Leopard Toad.
I got involved with leopard toads back in 2007, and in those days there wasn't much information about them. How it happened was that my friend Susie was training to be a Montessori teacher, and she happened to be studying over August, which is when the Western Leopard Toad migrates down to the ponds to breed. And she phoned me up one morning and said, there's these animals all over the road, I think we better do something because they're getting squashed. So we headed out the next night and started picking up as many as we could. And then a few nights after that, we recruited a few friends, and the following year we opened it up to the local conservation group members. and Toad Nuts was formed. Toad Nuts, in fact, stands for Notuk's Unpaid Toad Savers, because we're all volunteers. We do this out of our own free will and our free time, and we do it because we love this animal. It's easy to love this animal because when you think about an animal that's trying to migrate to a pond to breed, and they're walking long distances at night in the rain, often down roads, and you see their determination, their passion, and their commitment to reproducing as a species, you feel something and you want to help save them. So we are now operating in 6 suburbs in the South Peninsula, all the way from Notuk through to Kommetjie, Clovelly, Fishhook, Milkwood Park. And we have dedicated patrollers who go out every rainy night in winter from July through to September. They pick up the toads, remove them off the road. And then the second part of what we do is we record the information. So we collect data. We have spreadsheets and data going back 11 breeding seasons now. And we often participate in scientific studies around the movement of these animals. And I guess the biggest question is, are we making a difference? Yeah, that's quite a hard one to answer. In some areas, the numbers have been improving, and that feels good. In other areas, they've taken a bit of a knock. And often that knock has to do with development, the ongoing pressure for housing and roads, and then of course the traffic that those roads bring. So a large part of the Toad Nuts work now has become about advocating for the rights of these animals. Someone has to speak for them. Someone has to say what a development could or shouldn't look like. Someone has to say we cannot put roads through wetlands. So that has become the work of Toad Nuts in 2018.
With concerted efforts, there may still be a glimmer of hope for the continued existence of these handsome Cape toads, and for future generations to enjoy their rumbling roars. But surely we need to do more to save the toads on our roads.